Whether you're considering going to a fish swap as a seller or a customer, or maybe you're going to a local club auction or some similar event for the first time, I've got some tips to help make this way more successful. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to talk about fish swaps, fish auctions, small shows where you can potentially sell or buy all sorts of things for our aquariums. They seem super simple. Go, see something you like, buy it, take it home. But let's talk about a couple things to help. One, if you're a seller, make sure that everything stays in tip-top shape and you end up with happy customers, so the next time you go to another one of these events, they remember you and come back for more. Or two, as a buyer, make sure that the things we're taking home have the best chance of success when we get them to our home aquarium. Let's first talk fish. If you're going to buy fish at any of these shows, the first thing to consider is the distance to travel home. You probably also want to consider the distance that maybe your sellers came from, and hopefully they're taking some of these precautions that I have here. But one of the first things I would totally suggest that you get a hold of is some way to carry your fish that is insulated. One example would be this. I know this is the one from Aquarium Co-op. You could get them from all over the place, but basically one of the insulated lined bags. They should have an actual lining in here, not just like your standard reusable grocery bag. These are fantastic because they help maintain temperature when you have them closed. They'll be zipped up top. They've got a lining inside them. Usually they can hold a number of fish bags. This is kind of the early version. If you really know you're going a longer distance, I would suggest getting something either like a styrofoam fish box, similar to what is used anytime most of the shippers out there, folks like Dan's Fish, for example, are shipping fish to you. They're coming in a styrofoam box. You could go get like a styrofoam cooler at a local grocery store or something like that, or go all the way and get yourself a standard cooler. We can use them for more than just keeping beverages cold with a bunch of ice. If you are trying to keep things warm, especially if you have a longer drive, you can just tape some heat packs to the top of the lid, and then once it's closed, it's going to hold in some of that temperature. The same way that a lot of our online fish sellers are going to ship fish to us, this is a way that we can help maintain heat for our fish that we pick up at a swap and take home. Now let's say you're a seller. You're bringing an insulated box when you're taking your fish, just like you would as a buyer, to help maintain temperature with those fish on the way in. However, there's a couple other things. If you have a longer drive, you might instead keep some of your fish in buckets and bag them at the event. And while you're on your drive, use something like this. This is a battery-powered air pump. There's a bunch of different versions too nowadays, like you can get the USB-powered ones. Aquarium Co-op has their little nano pump that's USB-powered, the battery backup pump. There's a bunch of other variations that are the same design, battery backup or USB, that you can find all over Amazon. These are great options for if you just have your fish in a bucket and you want to make sure there's plenty of oxygenation keeping to those fish while you're traveling. Now, if you're not going to go that route, you need to keep everything bagged because you don't want to have to bag it there on site. Maybe you're bringing a lot of fish and you want to make this more simplistic. Here's what I would do. You can do one of two things. You're either going to have your fish in a bag or a container like this. I know a number of people that will use like small mason jars or like plastic deli cups, etc. for some of the fish that are more likely to break through a bag, or for things like snails and plecos that are just a little bit more bigger body or spined, and they're worried about some kind of issue happening in the plastic bag. But in the case of your plastic bags with fish, always double bag. Anything that you have a good amount of water in, always double bag. I know this is a used bag, but bear with me, right? When we're bagging our fish, you don't need water up to here. Think of it like when you go to a fish store or when you receive fish from any place online. You only need really enough water in the bag for the fish. So if we were doing this big bag, I'd probably only fill water up about this much. And then that leaves the rest of this bag to be full of air. if you're not pumping in pure oxygen, that's what like professional fish sellers do. You can use like an air pump. I used to actually keep an air line over here on my rack all the time so that whenever I was taking fish somewhere, I could just pump the bag up, seal it off direct from my air pump. There's a method where you can just catch it closed and that will keep a large amount of air in there if you're trying to be fancy. But regardless, you want way less water than you want air in this, because as the water moves around, just like in our fish tanks, it'll create a little gas exchange and help move oxygen throughout. If you're selling fish, another thing to do, make sure that you are not feeding your fish right before you take them to a swap. So as an example, let's say I'm going to, the time that you're watching this, I'm probably on the road to the Greater Portland Aquarium Society's auction that's happening today, Saturday. If I were bringing fish, I would have packed them up Friday night or potentially very early Saturday morning. It depends on what I'm trying to take and how much I need to pack, right? In those cases, I'm going to make sure that I haven't fed them at least since Thursday morning. I might, 24 hours is a minimum. Sometimes you want 48, especially if you're going to put multiple fish in one bag, because you don't want those fish pooping in the bag, creating ammonia, and then potentially poisoning themselves in the bag. You've got a limited amount of water in there. You don't really have filtration. There are ways to add some things. I know a number of people that put a little bit of prime when they're putting their water in their fish bags. That's a great way to do things. Some will use little ammonia pads. I'm not as big on those personally, but that's just a paranoia thing because they can get chewed on or something by your fish, and you can cause other problems that way. It's a lot easier if you're doing limited amounts of water to just put a little touch of prime in there or something like that in order to keep your fish safe. Another thing, when it comes to being a seller, and this will be the last tip for fish, if you are having to drive a decent distance and you're not using breather bags, which would be the other thing I would suggest, is potentially look at using breather bags for long distance. Set your fish up in a way that if you can perform water changes. I know several people, folks like Tom at TM Aquatics, for example, and some others that will, if they know they're driving a long distance to a swap, they will go to that swap like the day before or something and set up, do a water change on those fish the morning of in their bags, and then be good to go. This is just about optimizing the potential fish health and making sure that you have the lowest chance of something going wrong so that when your customers are buying something from you, and us as customers too, when we're buying stuff, we get to know that our fish are going to go home and be healthy. From a buyer's perspective, one of the last things you need to make sure you do, have a quarantine tank. You don't just bring your fish home to the fish like this that are already in a tank and dump new fish in with them. Play it safe. Those fish have gone through some stress. You can set up a simple 10 or 20 gallon tank, whatever, and set that tank up even a couple days before. All you need to do is give those fish a little bit of time in a tank to relax, de-stress from all the travel, make sure that they don't run into any disease issues, because sometimes this stressful process can weaken their immune system, and something that they would otherwise not have a problem with, ick, for example, is really common, that can all of a sudden show up. And you don't want that showing up with all of your normal fish in your beautiful tank, right, like this, that are doing just fine. You want to make sure that those fish come in, they have time to recover, to relax, and then you move them to wherever their final display is, maybe after a couple of weeks in quarantine. If you are setting up a brand new tank, super, super simple. You don't necessarily need to have it like perfectly set up all the time. You can literally set this tank up a few days in advance. Use something like one of the Turbo Starts or Fritz Zyme, any of those Kickstarter bacterial cultures, and a simple sponge filter. You don't need anything crazy, just enough to have oxygenation, a little filtration, and be paying attention to those fish. Maybe you're doing extra water changes for them when they get in. Whatever that may be, have a quarantine tank so that when you bring in your new fish and they're stressed out, if something does happen to them, it doesn't affect the rest of your fish in your tank. Plants. You guys know that I really advocate going to local swaps, etc., and selling your plants. I've had a lot of success doing it. It can be really easy to make $400, $500, $600, even more. I've had folks in my comments and stuff say that, like, hey, they made $700+ in a single auction with their stuff at their local club, or in swaps have been able to make phenomenal money because they were prepared ahead of time, right? So here's a couple of my tips. Number one, when you're bagging, whether you're going to use a fish bag or you're a lazy butt like me and you're going to use a Ziploc bag, keep in mind that almost all plants, there are very few, require to be completely deluged in water, right? You just really need a small amount of humidity inside these bags with the plant to keep them okay. And plants can sit in a bag for multiple days okay. So prepping these ahead of time is good. Label your bags. Make it big and obvious. Like, if you're in an auction, you're usually going to have some kind of numbering system or something like that, but make it obvious what is inside the bag right on front. That way it's easy for people to read and they'll know right away, or when they take it home, they'll have something to reference if they're trying to remember what that plant is. They don't have to remember like some notes they wrote down or from talking to you. They have it right there on the bag to tell them what it is. For some of your finer leaf plants, I have a little trick. Beyond just the bag, some of these plants can be really fragile. A little piece of paper towel, is your best friend. Why do I say that? Fold it up. This is usually good. Just fold in half. Get it lightly wet. You don't necessarily have to use tank water. You could use water straight out of the tap, but make sure it is lukewarm. Don't go super cold or super hot. Squeeze it out so it's just damp. All we're trying to do is have something that keeps moisture inside the bag. Place this in your bag, whether you got a smaller bag. Try to match it as best you can to like the size of your trimming, and then lay your plant against it. This is going to help that plant kind of stick in place, but also have something that keeps constant humidity internal to the bag when it's closed up. That will make sure that the plant is a little safer. This can be really good with some of the super fine leaf rhotalas and other plants. You don't necessarily need this for something like Java ferns or anubiases or things like that, but for some of your more delicate stem plants, this can be a really good way to help keep them happy during the trip so that your customers aren't having issues. As a buyer of plants, the first thing I would suggest doing is talk to your seller. Ask them how they grow that plant. If they're telling you it doesn't require CO2, but they grow it in a tank with CO2, you'll want to know how much CO2 they're using. Because if they're pushing really high amounts of CO2, and you're going to put it into a tank with no CO2, that plant might go through kind of a mini conversion cycle as it adjusts to not having that CO2 present. And if someone else has the same plant and they're like, oh, I grow it without CO2, and I just have this little like light, or it's like the same light you have, whatever it may be, try to find things closer to what you're doing, because that's going to give you better success when you bring it home and put it into your aquarium. For people that are worried about snails, you can use all sorts of dips when you're buying plants. You can do hydrogen peroxide sprays. You can use potassium permanganate. There's a lot of things to deal with, like snails, or if you're worried about disease on a plant. Me personally, I don't worry about any of that stuff. I just give them a very light rinse and put them in a tank. And usually what I'll do is I will float that plant for about a day before I actually plant it into the aquarium. I'm just kind of watching it, letting it float in the tank, kind of get used to my water. If they're fresh cuttings and there's no roots, I might float them a little bit longer until I start seeing some fresh roots growing out. And then I know it's ready for planting in my aquarium because it's kind of adjusted and got used to my water and started growing in my water. Other than that, most plants are super, super simple. So you don't necessarily need as many things. You probably don't have to have an insulated bag or a box or a cooler when you're buying plants. Unless it's really cold outside. If you're going to a swap and it's the middle of winter, or a club auction or something like that, take an insulated bag, just help retain some of that heat while it's in your car or in transport, whatever that may be, just to make sure that you're not dealing with some kind of temperature shock. In the summer, you don't need to worry about it. You can just have a standard cardboard box, a grocery bag, whatever, don't worry about it. That more matters for fish. I know this is a little like disjointed and stuff like that, but like I literally thought about this and was like, I'm going to an auction and I'm going just for fun, but I went to my own club's auction recently and I've done lots of swaps in the past. So let's talk about some of the tips, how I found success, and how you can find success too with bringing stuff home and not having to worry like, oh man, this fish is in a bag. How long has it been in the bag? What's its temperature like? Arm yourself with the right things and your likelihood of success goes way up. Now, of course, we could talk about like acclimation and all those things. We all know those. There's plenty of videos out there. Float your bag. Don't use the water that's in the bag. All those kind of things. But the keys are more about the to and from to the event and ways to maximize your success when it comes to keeping everything healthy, so that when it gets in your tank, it gets to look fantastic and you get to enjoy it for years to come. I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If so, let me know down in the comments. What is there a lesson you learned? Share a tip that you have. Maybe there's something I missed that you're like, Bentley, this is the smartest thing ever. Why aren't you doing it? Please, please, please let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing from you guys. If you're on your way to your first fish swap, or maybe you've got a friend who's going to one and they've got some questions, share them this video. Help them out. Give them some ideas. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.